Hey guys, I'm Lee,
And I'm Chris.
and we're the hosts of the Ambient Castle. And today we're going to be discussing the horror genre. So, the first thing to keep in mind is how do we define horror? Like, what are the elements that we can find within it? You know?
Yeah, because horror is kind of a broad topic. What we're focusing on in horror video games is going to be games that I feel that this is going to be the driving factor is games that have a clear intention to scare you as the player.
Right. Like, these games have to, like, set out from the outset to try and, like, instill a sense of fear within the person playing it, ideally.
So then I think a great place to start is then what makes up horror as a genre in general, and maybe just not even just in video games. I know some key elements are already isolation, empowerment, disempowerment, and helplessness. That sense that we can't really do anything, or maybe we can do something, and then the tension that comes out of these stories and how you're interacting with everything.
Right. And, all the other components that go along with that, such as, like, the environment in which your character is in, the monsters that are essentially, like, the driving force behind your anxiety, as well as, like, various, like, gameplay elements within horror games, such as resource management and whatnot.
Definitely. And I think maybe monsters is the best place to start, because what horror game isn't complete without its own monster?
It's true. So many games are, like, defined by, like, the monsters that are, like, within them. Like, I know, for example, probably one of the most famous video game monsters, I think, is Pyramid Head from the shitty Silent Hill movies. And his origin came from Silent Hill 2, specifically. I know there's, like, Pyramid Head.
Isn't he, and this is a little off topic, but isn't he a symbol of that character in that game, in Silent Hill 2 as well?
Yes, he represents, like, everything that the main character hates about himself. He's basically, like, raw, like, untapped, like, pure anger and, like, sexual violence as well. And he's basically the embodiment of the main character in all the negative ways of sorts. And he's essentially the poster boy for that game.
So the main character is the poster boy in that sense. That's awesome.
Yeah, his dark side, essentially.
And this is coming from someone who's I've never played Silent Hill 2, so it's a genuine. I'm curious about Pyramid Head most of the time, because I've seen him for everything. But what makes Pyramid Head, I guess, so unique in Silent Hill 2?
Well, I suppose what makes him pretty unique is that throughout, like, a good portion of the game, like, you're more of, like, a witness to him. Like, the first time that you encounter him, you see him pretty early in the game, and, like, this place called, like, the Blue Creek Apartments. And it's cool because, like, you don't have, like, any specific interaction. He's just kind of, like, staring at you as you're, like, walking down a hallway. And you, like, as you play the game, you, like, gradually have, like, more interaction with the monster, which leads to, like, different scenarios of, like, you fighting him, or you running from him in, like, a desperate escape to, like, save yourself. To, like, a final, like, confrontation with two of them at once.
So then it sounds like there's a progression there where, you do start with just the high Pyramid Head. Then the next bit is it the actual fighting, or are you running from this horrific monster?
Well, before the fight, you see a cutscene with him. So, like, you have, like, passive gameplay, with a cutscene of him actually having sex with another monster, and it's really, really disturbing. And it's after that you fight him, and then, the other events continue, such as, like, running and then having, like, a giant finale with him.
Okay, so then what is the piece that kind of makes him contribute to the fear of Silent Hill 2? Because I draw from a lot of the more recent games that I've played, like Soma and SCP Containment Breach, which no Pyramid Head there. I know. In Dark Souls, the Capra Demon, for a quick throwback, if you didn't know, the Capra Demon was directly inspired by Pyramid Head. But how does Pyramid Head contribute to the fear of the game? Because your interaction with a monster is kind of that's essential, and I know you touched upon what those various stages are, where you could see him, run from him, fight from him, and then have some kind of cutscene as well. But are these fights manageable? Are you able to? Do you feel like you can even do anything against this kind of creature?
Well, I think all the encounters are like fairly dangerous. Because like at the different points in the game, like your first encounter with him, you barely have any tools. Like you have literally two things. You have a wooden plank, and you have a handgun with not many bullets in it. And he has a giant knife, and he could essentially like behead you pretty quickly because it kills very quickly.
So at that piece, it's just you are outgunned and outmatched.
Yeah. Like it's just like a creature that's like so beyond your understanding. Like you're trying to like understand why the town is as messed up as it is, and you see like this giant hulking monstrosity that's like twice your size with like a giant executioner knife like slowly like coming toward you. And I think what really makes like him scary is like I guess the gradual evolution from like passivity to like an active threat that's like trying to hurt you throughout the game.
So he's a growing. I think this is also just a quick sidebar, but he's a growing tension, which is another element of horror that things are escalating. Things are getting progressively worse until a potential climax. Is that fair?
I think he's definitely like a very good like catalyst for like highlighting the rising tension within the game.
One of the last things that you said was not that recent, but it's like Pyramid Head. He's got the knife which can kill you pretty quickly. Oh boy. And I wanna juxtapose that to and we can debate whether or not this is a fair comparison, but in my love of the game SCP Containment Breach, your immediate interaction with a monster in the game is you're thrown into a jail cell, basically. It's not even your jail cell, it's just a cell that the monster is kept in, and they're running experiments on you. And the experiment is to see, I think I forget what they're trying to figure out. I don't even know if that's relevant, but they put you in the room with a monster that you need to look at so he doesn't move. And they bring 3 people into the room, you and disposable human lives, because this thing will just kill as soon as people stop looking at it. And you can just die at the beginning of the game. If you look away from the monster, as soon as you start, you die. Because that's just the way SCP starts, and that's I think it's a fun kind of. It's not just like the hi, hello, I see you from across the way, Pyramid Head. You can't get me right now, but later on you'll get me. It's full blast. The game starts out with the threat being literally next to you. And then it tries to ramp up from there.
Yeah. See, I think that's cool, but like, something about that just seems like a little bit like, not diluted, but like I kind of appreciate like the slow build up to like that kind of like anxiety, mainly because like, it does kind of stay in the back of your mind. And like I like how they do it in SCP because it is fun. Like it gets you straight into the gameplay. But I feel like maybe it's just like a bit too much initially. I mean, yeah, I can respect that. Like the proximity between you and the creature is like effective in that instance, but I feel like maybe it's like I think I might have just liked it more if it were a bit like more gradual, I guess.
So the thing I do understand where you're coming from on that too, and the piece I think is very different is what kind of tension is being brought in at that point, because SCP Containment Breach, I know the tension is at any given time you feel like you could be chased by by any of the creatures. It's not just the one creature. There's multiple things that are always going to be around you that can either kill you or severely hinder your ability to move forward. Most of which, like I said, kill you almost immediately. So it's that uncertainty of I'm being followed, or I'm about to walk through this door and come face to face with one of these horrific beasts, creatures, anomalies, I think is the proper word in SCP Containment Breach. But for and this is the, like I said, I think is the main difference, is that the tension for you is that slow build up, and for SCP it's a lot of uncertainty about what's coming to get you at any given time. It is a different feel. That's just how they're presenting their own story and their horror, and making the players completely uncomfortable with how they're trying to progress through the game.
Yeah, and to that extent, I think the method that they use in SCP is more powerful from a gameplay perspective, because since the monster is like almost always on your tail, in addition to all the other SCPs, it's kind of a different experience each time you play the game compared to Silent Hill 2, where like Pyramid Head is only in like set locations, and like in the event that you ever replay the game, it really does lose its like lasting impact compared to the more dynamic aspect of just having like the monster like stalking you.
Right, because at that point you lose that feeling of uncertainty, like, oh my god, am I about to come face to face with Pyramid Head? You're actually, it's a scripted event where you're just like, I'm prepared now to try and fight my inner demon, which is from what we were saying before, the essence of Pyramid Head.
Yeah, my a criticism that I do have with I would call it the stalker genre of horror games, I guess. The gameplay behind it, like all it takes is like one hit for them to kill you in that, right?
Yep. It is one and done.
I find that kind of frustrating, because I think for like shock value, yeah, it's very like intimidating for there to be a creature that can like instantly kill you. But to me, I think it's a bit more effective to have something like constantly like nipping at you, like taking big bites out of like your health bar and all that, because it puts like this mental strain on you, where like you're like, oh my god, am I gonna be able to like survive my next encounter with this thing? You know, and it's just like it's just looming in there, you know.
I understand that. And I get the sense of frustration, and I personally have experienced this with the creatures. They're, like I said, a lot of them can kill you pretty much in one hit. But with the primary one that you come across with in SCP Containment, I've walked into rooms and died because it just happened to be in the corner and I didn't look at it fast enough, or there were actually several times that happened. I stopped playing for a brief period after those times, because you're right, it is frustrating to just be so helpless against the mechanics of the game.
Yeah, and like at the same time, like if you're just insta-killed, like it doesn't really give you as a player like the opportunity to learn if you just walk into a room and die. So like to that effect, it kind of like kills the fear.
At that point, the lesson you've learned is not to walk into that room.
Yeah, and like if you're getting frustrated more than like scared, I think in that regard the game isn't really succeeding in like it's not really succeeding in trying to get the audience to have the proper response, you know?
Right. I do agree that is definitely a downfall, and not being able to. It's almost like it's not being able to experience the fear of it. It's just like, oh my God, I'm dead. So great, okay, fantastic. Then where do you go from there?
Right.
It's like in some games, like that oh my God, I'm dead. Shout to your life is really just a jump scare.
Yeah, essentially.
I personally, and this is my, raising my hand for the opinion flags right here. I dislike jump scares. I think they're fairly cheap is in many horror games. Because like, basically I do agree with the what you were trying to get at before, is that I do like gradual horror. I do like the sense that there's this unknown tension. But while jump scares can be like that unknown piece, if you're not, and they could be scripted events, they could be based off of something. I'm just referencing the Five Nights at Freddy's, but if you fail at a certain thing, you're gonna get a jump scare, and some people just can see that from a mile away. So if you're first starting playing out those kind of games, you get that jump scare. You're right. You're scared. You get that, your heart starts pounding and you're just like, holy shit, I just lost. But it's something that's learnable, and it's just like, it's not something that can continuously be there to cause that tension, because it's something like, okay, I know it's about to happen. It's that you can always expect it at certain times, and you can always know it's about to happen.
Yeah, it's like classical conditioning, like at its finest, and like it works to a point, but in terms of like leaving the audience with like that lasting kind of like fear that like actually makes you think, I don't think jump scares are that effective in that regard. There's a time and place for them, but not as like the primary means of eliciting fear in someone.
I definitely agree with that. That's I think you got that right on the nose. Because that feeling of lasting fear, I think that's actually a difficult thing to accomplish with a lot of games. Like not just lasting fear, but a lasting effect of some kind of emotional effect or mental effect that like either keeps you thinking about it or makes you maybe want to revisit it. Because I'm certain that there were pieces of Silent Hill too that you played through and you said, I want to revisit this. And that's something that I think a lot of more modern games can struggle to really produce.
Yeah, and like I think one of the big reasons like why I hold like Silent Hill 2 in such a high threshold in terms of like horror games, it's because like the lasting horror within it is like very compelling to me. Like the entire game is just like a deconstruction of like this man's psyche and how like the town represents like different aspects of him. And when you look at like the big picture, like when you look at the monsters like representing different parts of him, the different environments, being symbolic of the different states of his marriage or the main character's marriage. And when you learn like the big reveal that like, James, the main character, like killed his wife, like everything starts to make sense. And you see the horror of like an ordinary man, like turning into like a killer out of like sympathy. And I think in that regard, that's pretty terrifying to me, at least.
Definitely. That's something that can keep people up. I don't mean to be so cliche. It'll keep you up at night.
No, it does. Like it really does.
I do actually and the description of that storyline. First off, thank you for spoiling it for me. And
sorry about that.
I'm only joking. It's been spoiled for me many times. I'm spoiled. But that reminds me of Layers of Fear. If you're familiar with the game or the story of it.
I know the premise. I believe it's like an artist who's like slowly descending into madness or something along those lines.
Something along those lines is fair, but the thing that reminded me of when you were talking about kind of the evaluation of what is it, James from Silent Hill Psyche is at the core narrative of Silent Hill 2. In Layers of Fear, the narrative behind your, I don't want to say protagonist because he's just, the player character. But he's a conflicted man who, yes, is an artist. But it's revealed throughout the course of the game that he was a large part in, it's in murdering, kind of, maybe not murdering is the right word, but I think I would go with murdering the people around him. But it's also about his descent into madness.
Right.
And Layers of Fear is like he's already gone mad. Spoiler alert. He is far gone by the time you get to him at the start of the game. It's just his perspective is not to be trusted. And that's something that is a direct relationship to Silent Hill 2, because how much of it is just James's perspective is just warped towards him. Like, this is, I don't want to say a hallucination, but manifestations of his own wrongdoings and guilt and basically just raw emotions that are just coming back to him. And I see that as very similar to what Layers of Fear is.
Yeah, I do too. In terms of the descent into insanity. I'm not 100% familiar with Layers of Fear, but I know that Silent Hill 2 is trying to portray a killer as complicated. Whereas I assume Layers of Fear is just this man slipping into dementia.
Well, it's got layers, Not to make a bad joke, but actually just to make a bad joke. I wanted to say that. But not dementia, but obsession and passion mixed with grief and hatred, I would say, is what Layers of Fear is. After a playthrough or two, you can get that sense. Maybe even just part of a playthrough, you can get that sense that is what this person is experiencing.
Okay. What causes? What's the impetus for him losing it? Is it he's a failed artist, or? So.
I haven't played the game in quite some time, so I don't want to speak too directly about it, because I will probably end up being wrong. But from what I remember, there was a horrific accident in which his wife was stuck in a fire, and his wife, being someone who was so obsessed with her own beauty, lost her face, basically, because it was burned. I've lost my face. I think that's a funny sentence. That's wonderful. I'm glad that I uttered those words, but it's kind of serious. The person was burned horrifically over their entire face, and I think even other parts of their body, like their hands, may have been. I'm reaching, and I don't know if I'm actually grasping onto things, but. They were mortified that they were no longer beautiful, and basically completely changed into a distant and cold, almost witch-like existence. And this is told through the character finding items in the game that kind of explain what the backstory is of these events that led to kind of his downfall. He was already a struggling artist, and then all of a sudden, fire burns his wife. Everyone's upset. And then things just get worse from there, because he's no longer able to support anything. She's unhappy with him because he can't support her, and she's unhappy because she's a monster in her own eyes. And then, then death, and then that's when, everyone's gone, everyone's haunted, everyone's insane. And by insane, I mean, most people are dead, and it's just this guy roaming around his mansion. Which is not a mansion. It's like it's a nice sized house, but
right.
But if you play through the game, it's like big.
Okay, so let me ask you this. I want to delve into because you mentioned earlier that you learn about the story through the items that you find. Right. Are you explicitly shown cutscenes for this, or
no cutscenes?
Okay. How do you feel about that?
As a storytelling mechanic, I think it's good for supplementary information. But I personally feel that, and this is again raising the opinion flags. I would like to kind of not be spoon-fed my story. I want to experience it. I want to experience the story of things getting worse, and I think that could be done in different ways rather than just find this item or you won't understand why this happened or why this is happening or why you are who you are. Because a lot of those things, it's kind of crucial to understanding why the game's called Layers of Fear, because there are multiple layers of why things are bad and who this guy is and what happened to them. I think that could be shown and experienced rather than just read on a page or read to you from a page.
Right. I can probably count on my hand how many times on a single hand, how many times I've successfully felt immersed by supplementary information found from notes. And that's pretty bad. Two that I can think that are genuinely good, because they tell a brief tale and then resolve it very quickly, are the Itchy Tasty Man from the Resident Evil remake. And that little quip is great because you see a slow transformation of some ordinary researcher gradually turning into a monster. And then immediately once you finish reading that, you have an encounter with him. He comes running out of the closet and you have a proper resolution to the storyline. It's really silly too. I really recommend looking that up because that's probably one of the best Resident Evil file archive things.
Which one was this? Is this you said the remake?
Yeah, it's the Itchy Tasty Man.
I'll have to watch that.
Yeah. And I believe the other one is also in a Resident Evil game. They do these really well when they do that right. It's the one on the 3DS, Resident Evil Revelations.
I'm not aware of that one actually.
It's a really solid game. The HD remake is actually worth playing. And in that one, it's a little similar to the prior one, but you get a couple of notes scattered throughout the ship deck, and it's telling you about this guy who's who's been infected with the C virus, but he's very unaware of it, and he gets locked inside a room, and you gradually see what's going on in his life. Waiting for the SOS signal, and similar to the Itchy Tasty Man, you have an encounter with him, except this one is very long and drawn out, and before you get to the fight, you hear this weird moaning, and when you finally get to the door, you have to shoot the padlock off, and he comes screaming out of there with a buzzsaw ready to impale you.
Okay, I'm sorry that it's supposed to be more scary, but I laughed. That's And so that's you being shown these notes and this idea, not the idea, but the person kind of you're finding out information about events that have already happened, and then you resolve it quickly by coming in, presumably putting this guy out of his misery.
Yeah, and like I mainly like that for supplemental storytelling because like there's like player interaction in it, which is kind of the point of a video game.
Player interaction in a video game? Who's ever heard of that? Right.
And like
one question I had before you go any further is this I know you mentioned supplementary, but is this something that you can avoid in the game, or is this something that's just like is always you have to come across this to proceed?
So for the first one with the Itchy Tasty Man, that one is completely optional because your only reward for doing that is a small key, and you don't need those to progress through the game, but they do help. So that's kind of like a neat way of engaging the player in like a side activity. But for the second one, there's no avoiding this boss fight. Like you absolutely have to do this, and like it's compounded by the fact that like with all of like the other like notes and like the noises that you hear, it just works really well from like both of those angles.
Gotcha. Well, that's still cool. And the reason I bring up kind of that focus on supplementary is because like that's additional information about the environment that you find yourself in that kind of helps to flesh out the story of like, this is how bad things are. This is why people are, this is like the stages of people's like fall into the sickness and the madness and the horror that engulfs them. So that's just me appreciating that completely optional portion of it. And I know you said that the one guy with the buzzsaw man, I don't even know if he has a name, but
I think he's like the ship captain or something like that.
Captain Buzz Lightyear.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's not avoidable, but still appreciate that kind of backstory to your interactable backstory to coming into contact with this boss.
Yeah, and in terms of like, I guess more like not explicit storytelling, but like I want to bring back Silent Hill 2 once more. I know, but that game does a very interesting job of giving you like the explicit story in addition to like having player agency in terms of like how you play the game, interact with it. And what I mean by that is that like very small choices that you wouldn't expect play into like how the ending scenario plays out. So let's assume you're being like very like cautious and like you take care of yourself. You don't read like negative things that like would bring down the mental health of like any sane human being. Mm-hmm. That would give you an ending with like a more positive outcome, in which the main character simply like leaves the town, compared to like something that I didn't even realize until later. But there's like several notes you can read in the game that are optional, of course.
Optional notes are always good.
Yes. I hate it when they're forced. But if you read them, they have some like very bad effects. For instance, like in the game, there's a hospital that you encounter, and there's a journal on the roof of the hospital. You don't see too much around it aside from like a small like pool of blood around it, but it's also like trailing off to the side. And after reading the journal, you basically like understand like this person's life, and like you basically find out that they like jumped off the roof in suicide. And that's like one of like the several events in the game that can like tie into the ending if you happen to view it, in addition to like not healing yourself properly or like killing too many monsters. That also ties into like negative effects for your mental health.
Oh, so in that sense, it's kind of like you're basically you're forging your story, and you're the outcome of your actions as you go through it. It's not like it's just, and then I know we said this before, but it's not like it's just being fed to you. It's not just forced upon you.
Right, and it's done in a manner that like is like that I think is a bit more subtle. Instead of like, choose to save X, which is like clearly the good choice or whatnot. Like it's like actual gameplay mechanics. Like you don't heal yourself, you take part in too much violence. Like of course that's gonna like lead to your character like doing something like harmful to himself at the end of the journey.
Yes, and like I completely, I think that's a very noteworthy and kind of something that you're right to appreciate that in Silent Hill 2, because I know games give you these like strangely clear-cut choices that it doesn't entirely feel meaningful, because it's like press A to go left, press B to go right, or A for yes, B for no, and you just, I feel like those choices are not really choices all the time, because you're not doing it. It's very static. I personally think it's more jarring and not as fulfilling as something that you might not even be thinking about as you're doing it, but it's just like, this is how I am when I play, and like this is, and potentially not knowing about it either. It's like, I am just going to, like, in this person's shoes, in this character, I am going to kill these monsters as much as possible, or I am going to be very stingy with my healing. Like that could just be how you play, and the ending, the outcome that you get is truly deserving.
Yeah, it is, because like in a manner it's almost like a deconstruction of the player,
Yeah.
And like, if anything, I'm kind of scared of like what that tells me about myself if I'm not willing to like take care of myself in this kind of situation, like,
hey, that's going too far. That's analyzing your own psyche in a game that's about analyzing a fictional character's psyche. How meta are we getting?
True. But I think the fact that like the game is able to like elicit that kind of like thinking really goes to show a lot about like how well the gameplay design really just plays into it.
Definitely, and then it kind of also ties into that lingering thoughts, that something it leaves you with something. It leaves you with something to actually ruminate on.
Exactly.
Well, this has been a ton of fun, and I know that we didn't get to talk about all of the points of horror that we wanted to. We are both. I love how we gravitate towards the horror titles that we are so passionate about, and I know that there's plenty more to discuss with horror, and we could talk for hours on end about it. So if we wanted to, if there's interest, I'm not opposed to continuing to do more on this. I love talking about things that are frightening.
Same here, man.
Personally, like the frightening games and having that fear, and then being left with something to. And this is exactly the thing that we're hoping for, is that a game can elicit something that lingers with you, and especially with these horror games, is not just the fear, but the thoughts that drive it and kind of embody what is behind it, what is really at the root of these fears, and what makes it so special. And this is just the horror fiction that I personally love.
Yeah, and I do as well. And anything that leaves a lasting impression, like, I think that's a genuinely good piece of art. And I'm honestly really happy that, like, video games alone are able to do that, and especially horror games, because they really are something truly unique.
This has been a ton of fun. I hope this has been, an entertaining and enjoyable experience for any listeners out there. And of course, you're welcome to come back and enjoy the soothing, the chill, the wonderful discussions around video games that is Ambient Castle.
Thank you guys so much for your time.
Thank you. Bye.
See you.